Well, thank you, Simon, and thanks to everybody who could join us today. One of the things that makes me so proud to work for All Wales People First is the fact that we are genuinely member-led. Although I have lived in learning disability care services myself for 11 years, I'm very much our members' employee. They hold me to account and they call the shots. We see so much of doing to rather than doing with in the social and third sectors. But when we say we are member-led, we mean we are member-led. As you will see in the picture montage that accompanies my speech, members of our National Council wrote and signed off this manifesto. It is their work, it belongs to them and them only. So our National Council is a member-led forum made up of people with learning disabilities across the 22 counties in Wales. They represent the voices of people with learning disabilities in their region. In this picture montage, you will see some of the process and time that has gone into writing this manifesto. As with everything else in People First, it is designed by and owned by our members. The journey to writing the manifesto began with a facilitated session by our member engagement advisor, Tracy Drew, back in January 2020. We asked our members the fundamental questions about what was important to them and the people they represent, and what needs to change in Wales if they were to be included as equal citizens. From this, members listed the topics that were important to them and discussed them in groups. The topics were displayed on a sticky wall and members voted on their priorities. These priorities then became the themes, and this gave myself and our policy and communications manager, Kelly Stewart, the steer we needed to write a first draft of the manifesto. The drafts were brought to several National Council meetings, and the members told us what they liked and didn't like, what we'd understood or misunderstood, and we further shaped the manifesto from there. Eventually, we had a manifesto that the National Council were happy with, and they signed it off. Some people think that people with learning disabilities are not able to take part in politics. Some people think that taking the time to make things accessible for people with learning disabilities to be able to take part in politics is unrealistic and a waste of time and effort. And people could not be more wrong. So let me give you two key reasons. People with learning disabilities can understand and play an active part in politics. Our members are very clear about the issues that affect their lives and what they think needs to change to make things work for them. They don't just identify the problems, they give practical solutions. People with learning disabilities are as equally entitled to have their voice heard as any other citizen in Wales. Making the time to make things accessible for people with learning disabilities to take part in the political process may take a little extra time in the short term, but in the long term, it guarantees that their needs are met at the first time of asking. This is what guarantees that our current manifesto is authentic. All politicians, strategists, and decision makers need to understand that when you are designing a Wales that wants to work for people with learning disabilities, people with learning disabilities themselves are your primary source of information. Working in co-production is the key to success. We hear a lot about key legislation in Wales, such as the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act and the Social Services and Wellbeing Wales Act, which talks about an aspiration to ensure that all citizens are able to access Welsh society and play an active part as equal citizens. But the reality in the ground is very different. In our manifesto, our members have identified the key barriers to making this aspiration a reality. And these barriers are themed in our manifesto. And our members will tell you about them in more detail in a moment. Remember, a Wales that works for people with learning disabilities as a Wales that works for everyone. People with learning disabilities want to be taxpayers. People with learning disabilities want to be independent. People with learning disabilities do not have to be dependent on benefits. People with learning disabilities want to live in safe homes, in safe communities. People with learning disabilities do not want to be the victims of hate-related crime. People with learning disabilities want to be healthy and to have equal health care. We've always wanted to play a part in Welsh society, to play our part and do our bit, but it is society that has excluded us. So if we want to change this, And if we want a society in which people with learning disabilities can make an equal contribution to the prosperity and sustainability of Wales, then in line with what I've said before, this manifesto is your primary source of information. It came from the genuine voices of people with learning disabilities in Wales. It is genuine and it is authentic. When given time, people with learning disabilities, with accessible information, space to come together to discuss with peers, are able to fully contribute to the discussion about how to make a better Wales. So we urge you all to do the same in the work you do. So I say to all politicians of all parties in Wales, all decision makers, all commissioners and local authorities, make this manifesto not only your primary source of information, but also your roadmap, not only for the future, but for the future and benefit of all citizens in Wales. So please listen now with open ear to our members. Please get behind our manifesto and let's make 2021 an enormous victory for self-advocacy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Joe. We're now going to hear from members of All Wales People First on the key messages in the manifesto. Firstly, we're going to hear from David.
Thank you, Simon. I'm David Whittle from Brecon, and I'm here to talk to you the importance of self-advocacy. Speaking up for yourself is the most important part of self-advocacy, but it takes time to learn your rights and to have the confidence to speak up to people in power. It is more difficult to get people with power to listen to you than anything. We have to learn these skills, these things, by going to people first or self-advocacy group. You learn together, you're not alone. The way advocacy is written about in the Social Services and Wellbeing Wales Act means local authorities don't think they have to fund self-advocacy groups. The Act is in danger of taking our voices away, which is precisely the opposite of what that aims to do. We are asking for the Senate and local authorities to work together to make sure self-advocacy has enough money. Thank you.
Thank you, David. We're now going to hear from Catherine.
I'm Catherine from Swansea. I'm going to talk to you about how we like to identify ourselves. Over recent years, there has been a lot of talk about the words we use to label people with disabilities. These labels have been made by people without a learning disability. We understand why people use these terms, but we have not made that decision. Nobody but a person with a learning disabilities has the right to say what language describes our impairment. The People First movement in Wales is our voice. All Wales People First members review the terminology we use every three years. In 2018, we chose people with learning disabilities. We want our decision to be respected and listened to. Call to action. We call to the Welsh Government and local authorities to use the terminology chosen by people with learning disabilities.
Thank you, Catherine. Next, we're going to hear from Sophie.
Hello, I'm Sophie Hinksman from Pembrokeshire, co-chair of the Learning Disability Ministerial Advisory Group and co-chair of the All Wales People First Board of Directors. Only 5.6% of people with learning disabilities are in paid work, but many more people with learning disabilities want to work. Working is important for our dignity, well-being, and for us to be part of the community. We're fairly excluded from employment. We need opportunities to try jobs and support from employers to learn skills through on-the-job learning. We call on Welsh Government to support more paid employment opportunities for people with learning disabilities in Wales. We call on Welsh Government and local authorities to work with people with learning disabilities when writing or reviewing employment policy.
Thank you, Sophie. Next, we are going to hear from Geraint, who's unfortunately James could not be here today, so Geraint will be reading on his behalf.
Diolch. Thank you, Simon. Bore da, everyone. My name is Geraint Griffiths. I'm the outreach worker for All Wales People First, and I'm the member of West Glamorgan People First and Blaenau Gwent People First. These are the words on James's behalf. I want to talk to you about transport. People with learning disabilities use public transport more than most people. We need an accessible, safe, and affordable transport system. Without it, we cannot play an active part in Welsh society as promoted in many Welsh laws. We are calling for equal access to transport across the whole of Wales. And to make this happen, we want to keep our bus passes. We want accessible information. We want transport staff who can help to keep us safe. And we want our say in how transport works in our communities and across Wales. Diolch, back to you, Simon.
Thank you, Geraint. Next, it's me. And I'm talking about equality. There are far too many examples of how people with learning disabilities are not treated fairly across Wales. Inequality affects all areas of our lives: education, relationships, employment, access to information, our social lives, and so much more. We think that including the United Nations Convention of the Rights of Disabled People into Welsh law will help to tackle these inequalities. We also need a champion, someone to fight with us at the highest levels. We call on the Welsh Government to include the UNCRPD into Welsh law. We also call on the Welsh Government to establish a commissioner for people with learning disabilities to champion our rights and bring attention to inequalities. We're now going to hear from Rebecca.
Thank you. Hi, I am Rebecca Morgan from Wales. I am here to talk to you about the importance of health. The COVID-19 crisis has hit us harder than most of the population. People with learning disabilities were 6 times more likely to die from COVID than people without learning disabilities. Some of these deaths were preventable, caused by existing health inequalities. The report in the early death of people with learning disabilities found that 38% of deaths of people with learning disabilities were avoidable. For people without learning disabilities, that figure was 9%. It is important to our health and well-being that we're friends and relationships as important opportunities to contribute. Many people with learning disabilities who are living in care or in hospitals could be living in the community with full active lives. We call on the Welsh Government to remove the health inequalities experienced by people with learning disabilities by providing adequate care, follow-up services, providing annual health checks, providing accessible information, increases use of direct payments, employing more learning disability nurses.
Thank you, Rebecca. Next, we are going to hear from Richard.
Hello, and I'm Richard Redmond from Conway. I want to talk to you about Brexit. We are worried that Brexit will hit people with learning disabilities hard. Before Brexit, Wales had the EU money for education, skills, and employment projects that helped us. We are worried that this money will not be replaced. The full impact of Brexit on disabled people has not been talked about much by the Welsh, all the politicians, and as well as Westminster. We fear that we will lose rights protected by under EU law and upheld by the European Court of Justice. All the disabled people were not included in the development of Brexit policy. And this means the impact on our lives has not been considered. We are calling on the Welsh Government to consider the implications of leaving the EU and people with all the learning disabilities, and to create a plan to protect us from the impact.
Thank you, Richard. And finally, we are going to hear from Angie, whose story has inspired our final call to action, followed by Faith.
Thank you very much for having us on, my cousin and I. I really want to thank Dr. Edwin Jones first, because he introduced me to Joe Powell. And thanks to Joe for fully embracing Cheney's Law and wanting to include it in the All Wales People's First Manifesto. I'm so impressed with what you're doing in Wales. You're doing better than what's happening in England. So I'm really thankful. I just quickly want to say, my son was 23 when he went as a voluntary patient. He just finished his master's, wanted to do his PhD, went as a voluntary patient to a mental health unit in South London. When he wanted to leave, instead of calling me, they called the police, and up to 11 police officers in 2 sets of restraint for up to about 45 minutes basically killed him. And what gets me was when he went limp, which is an indication that you're lifeless, you know, instead of doing CPR, they thought he was faking it, pretending, and they then left the room and basically left him to die on the floor. Anyway, it took us 7 long years to get an inquest. And when we did, the jury found that the police had used unnecessary, disproportionate, excessive force and restraint to kill him. As a result of that, our MP, Steve Reed, very kindly decided he wanted to bring a law in Parliament in England in honor of Cheney, to honor his legacy. And that's how Cheney's Law, which is actually called the Mental Health Units Use of Force Act 2018, came into force. Right. I just want to say it is at the moment just in England in mental health units, but you in Wales can do better and bigger, because we want to extend it to schools, learning disability schools where there's a lot of restraint. We want to extend it to prisons and police cells. You know, it can be quite extensive. It's, as far as I know, the only law in the world that deals with restraint, but it's limited in England. And I think in Wales, you can do much better. I'm really impressed with what you're all doing. And now I'd just like to introduce my only Welsh speaking cousin who has supported us. We're all very close, who supported the family and and been with us all the way. Thank you, Malara.
Hello, bore da pawb. Good morning, everybody. Dwi'n mor hapus i siarad gyda chi bore yma. I'm really happy to be speaking to you this morning. Dwi'n byw yn Sir Benfro. Mae'n braf iawn. Yes, I live in Pembrokeshire. We've got a beautiful sunny day again today. Dwi eisiau dweud yr un peth mae Adji wedi dweud. Dwi yn falch o fyw yn Cymru. I'm really proud to live in Wales. Dwi'n falch o Llywodraeth Cymraeg. I'm really proud of the Welsh government. Before Christmas, I was approached by Race Council Cymru to work on the Welsh Government's Race Equality Action Plan. And I just think that the fact that all Wales People First have embraced our kind of campaign to have Shani's Law, not just in England, but also in Wales, and embraced not just equality for disabled people, but equality for all people. Now, the Race Council Cymru survey revealed deep-seated mistrust of the police within the ethnic minority community. And already in Wales this year, we've had 2 incidents, one in Cardiff, one in Newport, Mohammed Hassan and Moeed Bashir, who again was put into leg restraints, was having a mental health crisis, was put into leg restraints and handcuffed while an ambulance was called. Now, if somebody is ill and in distress, we would like to question why people continue to be treated like that. Why, for example, as well, we've just heard cases in the COVID pandemic of people with learning disabilities being given do not resuscitate. There's so much inequality in our society that continues today, that I think it's fantastic that all Wales People First have embraced equality on behalf of all of us and are speaking out against injustice. I want to say to you, no justice, no peace. And by that, I don't mean we all have to go out and cause civil disobedience. By that, I mean we all want to sleep peacefully in our beds at night, knowing that we will get parity of treatment with the police. We will get parity of treatment when we access health services. We will get parity of treatment when we get on public transport, that there will be public transport. So maximum respect to all of you, and thank you for inviting Adji and myself to speak today. Diolch yn fawr iawn i chi gyd.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Faye Parrington and I live in Aberporth in West Wales. Thank you very much, Adji. Diolch yn fawr i chi, Adji. Thankfully, I haven't died. Diolch byth, dwi ddim wedi marw. But I have experience of being held down by police in a mental health ward. Mae gen I profiad o gael ei ddal lawr gan yr heddlu a ddactoriad yn yr ysbyty. It is happening in Wales currently. Mae yn ddigwydd yng Nghymru. We are calling for Welsh Government to bring in a law like Shani's Law, in Wales to stop excessive force happening here. Thank you. Diolch.
Okay, thank you, Adji, Malara, and Faye.
Hi. There's a bit of a to and fro in there. It's rather I don't want to ask a question as such, but what I would like to say is how much I personally have appreciated the information and the background to what has happened and how it has touched my heart today. It has really caused some emotion. And I just want to show my gratitude and thank you so much for coming today and telling us about what has happened and also supporting us with us going forward to request such a law in Wales. Thank you.
I can see we have Carl, David and Wyatt.
I just wanted to say to Angie and the other person, that I am really grateful that you were on the meeting, and that I really support Black Lives Matters. And I'm really sorry, and I can't believe that the police did that to your son. How disrespectful and rude. We're gonna have to fight for change. I'm sorry, that is ridiculous. I'm not having that. There's got to be some way that the government can see that, get the police with their thick heads to work on a stupid law to stop harassing, stop taking down with people with disabilities, whatever the color of their skin is, and stop killing them. It's ridiculous. And it's an utter disgrace. Anyway, you guys have really touched my heart today, so thank you.
Thank you, Harry. We've got, I can see 3 hands up. We'll hear from David next.
Okay. What is the percentage of what's happening across Wales, across the UK, as like, what's the percentage of it?
Hi there, sorry. Yeah, there's been no decrease in the deaths. We, Adji and I, every year attend the United Families and Friends campaign march on the last Saturday of October. Last year, if you search on YouTube for the United Families and Friends campaign 2020, there's a film which we made with lots of different families talking about their experiences going back as early as the 1990s and bringing us right up to present day. On average, it's about 120 people per year, and that figure has not fallen at all. So it's a very sad indictment of the society and the culture that we live in. And as I said, 2 so far in Wales this year that we know of.
I think it's just under 2,000 people since 1990 that have died at the hands of the state through restraint. Yeah, it's not good. It's not good, and it has to stop. And this is why we're campaigning so hard. And this is why you can do better in Wales. You can do better. You know, I'm really impressed. Do better than the English. They're just, you know, in fact, just let me say, the law was passed in 2018, and up till now, we haven't got the guidelines out, the guidance out, because, you know, they keep saying, oh, COVID and Brexit and elections, so they push it back. So people have died during these COVID restriction lockdown. People have died and they didn't need to die. But there's no guidance out. So, you know, it's a constant battle. Yeah. Thank you, everybody, for your kind words and for your support. Let's do better in Wales. Do better. You can.
I agree. I agree 1,000,000% with you all on that.
Yeah.
Okay. We've got Faye wants to say something, but we've also got Cal and. I'm not sure, Fire, whoever that might be, but should we hear from Cal first?
Right, there's 2 things I want to bring up to you. It's about transport and AJ Lewis as well. Now, a lot of Black people with discrimination, such as AJ Lewis, has really touched my heart over this last year or so. And a lot of people with black people that are just getting discriminated a lot because they may have been outcast. And it's like a lot of them will just end up just having to go at each other, bringing knives out, or just tackling, or the police have just discriminate them, and the police will just shove them back and use batons and all that and just hit them over the head, which is totally wrong, which I know. And to be honest, Black people have got every right to stand up to the police and to say, well, look, this is not just this is not just our society, it's everybody's society, and everybody will get the chance to say, because it's not right. And the other thing is, on transport, most people with learning disabilities as well are using transport more, but some of them can't use a bus pass because some of them don't know how to use a bus pass tidy. So it's just that they say, oh, right, I lost my bus pass, I can't get on the bus. Well, and the bus driver will tell you, well, if you don't fit your bus pass in on the bus, you can't get on the bus at all. So it's just that particular reason they will stop them from doing it. And it's just one thing after another. I'm very disgusted what the world is coming to these days. And I'm really disgusted at them, because not everybody will speak up. I will speak up for most people with learning disabilities because I'm the chairperson of the regional groups, and as not everybody will say that in time or they will go one way or another, and then that's it. It's just everybody will just feel boxed in.
Thank you, Carl. Can we hear from Sophie, who is from Torfaen People First, who is fire?
What I'd like to say is I'm sorry to hear about your son, and your story like really touched me by my heart, really, because I've been approached by the police. They haven't been restrained or anything, but I was approached by them, and they like spoke down to me, and I felt like they were like telling me off, because they were talking down to me and looking down their noses at me, and it really scared me, because they don't seem to understand what people with disabilities are like. They need, in my opinion, they need to have their heads examined or have a boot up their backside, because they don't understand what we like. They think that we can't do things for ourselves, and it really makes me angry that they restrained somebody who was not well or something like that. They shouldn't have done that. They should have looked at him and thought, right, we need to do something about this, not just left the room and left him there. That is not what the police are supposed to do. They're supposed to care for people and help people and make the streets safe, not kill people. That's just stupid and unkind, and not the way that people should work. People who work like that should be, well, I'm not going to say it, but they need to have their heads examined, basically.
Sorry, I just wanted to say, we may have given you the impression that it's only people of color. It's not. There are a lot of white people, men, women, children, 14-year-old. It's not just people of color. Mainly the police restraint is people of color, but there are lots of people in prison, suicides because they can't get out and they're bullied and they're restrained by the prison officers. You know, in police cells, a lot of everybody. It's not just people of color. It's a lot of everybody. And we're seeing a lot of women who are being restrained and killed. So, you know, it concerns everyone, concerns everybody. Just had to make that point.
Okay, thank you, everyone. We have to move on now because Mark Isherwood is now here, so we can now hear from Mark Isherwood, member of the Senate.
Thanks very much to Joe for inviting me to make the closing comments at your manifesto launch as chair of the cross-party group on disability in the Senedd. Your manifesto highlights, as you know, the most important things for members of the All Wales People First National Council and other people with learning disabilities in Wales for the 2021 Senedd election. As your manifesto states, in 2018 you chose people with learning disabilities as the term you want to be described by, and you want your decision to be respected and listened to. People with learning disabilities across Wales still face significant, yet usually unnecessary barriers in their lives. Your manifesto states that self-advocacy is one of the most important things for you. As it states, people with learning disabilities have the right to speak for yourselves. Voice, choice and control are key parts of the Social Services and Wellbeing Wales Act. The next Welsh Government must continue to support advocacy services for people with learning disabilities, as well as promoting self-advocacy and supporting independent living. It must work to ensure that people with learning disabilities continue to have access to independent advocacy services and that sufficient resources are provided to meet demand, as well as helping to ensure that people have the skills and support to live as independently as possible. Your manifesto states that employment is one of the most important things for you. As your manifesto states, only 5.6% of people with learning disabilities are in paid work, but many more people with learning disabilities want to work. There are concerns that we could see a larger percentage of general unemployment post-COVID pandemic. The next Welsh Government must work hard to remove the barriers to employment that many people with learning disabilities currently face. For example, the charity Leonard Cheshire Disability note that there's been some progress in employers' attitudes in recent years, yet an understanding gap continues among employers when hiring disabled people, including people with learning disabilities. We must increase awareness of the Access to Work scheme in Wales. This scheme, funded by the UK government, helps to pay for adjustments to workplaces to assist disabled employees with their job. Research again from Leonard Cheshire highlights that just 14% of disabled adults in Wales have received support from this scheme, compared to 25% in England. The next Welsh Government must work with employers and the UK government to ensure that more people can request flexible working. Providing more flexibility to employees would help to open up more opportunities for people with learning disabilities to gain employment. We need a plan for jobs, opening up new opportunities to people across Wales. We also need a plan to improve the evaluation of outcomes, the measurement of what actually happened to people for disabled people, and ensure that employment opportunities secure long-lasting change for people with learning disabilities and close the disability employment gap. We need a greater push, not to make local authorities and others feel that this is a burden, but rather an opportunity to make things work better for everybody, to improve lives and ultimately reduce pressure on public services. Your manifesto states that transport is one of the most important things for you. As your manifesto says, people with learning disabilities rely on public transport. An accessible, safe and affordable transport system is vital if people with learning disabilities are to access their communities and reduce their isolation. Over half of disabled adults across the UK say they've experienced negative consequences as a result of public transport that did not accommodate their personal disability. The Equality and Human Rights Commission have also found that there is inadequate equality considerations for older and disabled people in public transport strategies and policies in Wales. The Commission reported that disabled people often found the public transport system in Wales largely inaccessible. So the next Welsh Government should assess transport infrastructure with the intention of removing barriers facing people with learning disabilities and all disabled people, emphasising that people are disabled by society, not themselves, and that we must work together to tackle the barriers to access and inclusion for all, to build a better Wales for everyone. They must work with the UK government to deliver real improvements to our transport infrastructure, where the responsibility for that is shared between them in many different ways. And they must ensure that public transport guidance is communicated clearly and in accessible or easy read formats. And as your manifesto states, people with learning disabilities also need continued access to bus passes so that you and your companion, if needed, can access buses and trains. Your manifesto states that equality is one of the most important things for you. As your manifesto says, it is important to you that you are treated as equals. People with learning disabilities are still often treated as second-class citizens or children. The Welsh Government's action plan, which is called Action on Disability, the Right to Independent Living, says that the social model of disability says that people are disabled by barriers to society that stop them from doing something, and not by their health condition or difference. And that's a quote from them. I'm not sure, completely comfortable with the term, but it mentions learning disability 3 times. First one, it says only 45 in every 100 disabled people have a job. The number of people with a learning, they said difficulty, but people with learning disability that have a job is much lower than this. It talks about carrying out the Improving Lives programme to improve public services for people with learning disabilities. And it says that young people with a learning disability often do not have work experience, or it doesn't lead to them getting a job. However, I hear almost every day from disabled people, communities and carers who are having to fight for the support and services they need to enable them to lead an independent life. Your manifesto calls on the next Welsh Government to include the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Disabled People in Welsh law. This convention sets out the rights of disabled people and provides what it calls a framework for action on how these rights are protected and enforced. I've previously spoken in the Senedd of the benefit in incorporating this into Welsh law in order to strengthen and promote the rights of disabled people. Above all, we must turn legislation and plans into action to give people with learning disabilities real voice, choice, control, and independence. Your manifesto says that health is one of the most important things for you. As your manifesto says, the COVID-19 crisis hit you harder than most of the population, and you call on the Welsh Government to remove the health inequalities experienced by people with learning disabilities. The next Welsh Government must have a plan to build back better following the pandemic and deliver the health service that people need, with a recovery plan for the Welsh NHS to clear the backlog in treatment, which should include the recruitment of more doctors and nurses, including learning disability nurses. Many people with learning disabilities experience inequalities in health, and research by Public Health England says that the death rate from COVID-19 is 6 times higher for people with a learning disability than the general population. I highlighted this with the Welsh Government and urged them to prioritise autistic people and or adults with learning disabilities to receive the COVID-19 vaccine. I was therefore relieved when the UK Government's Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation, that's the organisation that makes these decisions, advised that all people with learning disabilities should now be prioritised for the vaccine, and that the Welsh Government then announced that people with learning disabilities and unpaid carers would now be invited for a vaccine as part of Priority Group 6. As your manifesto also states, the next Welsh Government should increase the use of direct payments and community-based approaches when designing services. That legislation I mentioned earlier said that they should be doing this, they must do this. And under direct payments, only a tiny number of people eligible even apply, even know about them, and an even smaller number actually use them. And it's a matter of choice, of people deciding whether they want to have direct payments and whether they want to take control over their own lives and who they choose to employ in part or in full or not at all. That's their choice. Your manifesto states that Brexit is one of the most important things for you and that you fear that the repercussions of Brexit will hit people with learning disabilities hard. The Secretary of State for Wales, that's in the UK government, said in the Senedd's Finance Committee, so he was talking to the committee which I'm a member of 2 weeks ago, that the funding being made available to Wales, underpinned by the not a penny less guarantee, will provide opportunities for Wales to do even better than it has previously done in terms of funding, and that they're asking local authorities to join with what they call stakeholders, but other groups, including yours, with their members, also with the members of the Senedd, with Welsh Government officials, members of Parliament, to come up with really innovative ideas, either as individual authorities or joint with others, and to bid for the available money, where the lessons learned from this year will form the basis of what they're calling the Shared Prosperity Fund, which is a much larger packet of money that will become available from the end of this year onwards. So as your manifesto states, we must therefore ensure that this supports the education, skills and employment of people with learning disabilities. As the UK government also said early last year, after Brexit, it wants the UK to lead a global race to the top in rights and standards, not a competitive race to the bottom. And they said the rights of disabled people will be protected. So the next Welsh government must work to ensure that that is the case. Your manifesto states that reducing restrictive practice is one of the most important things for you. As your manifesto says, many people with learning disabilities continue to live with and experience services that restrict people's liberty. And it therefore calls on the next Welsh Government to introduce a law like England's Mental Health Unit's Use of Force Act in Wales to impose requirements around the use of force in such units. Last year, I participated in a virtual Zoom meeting with Denby Self-Advocacy Group for people with learning disabilities, which was also opened up to questions from people with learning disabilities from across North Wales, organised with the charity the North Wales Advice and Advocacy Association. I was questioned about both support for people with learning disabilities and wider concerns that the COVID-19 pandemic was not treating everyone the same and that people with learning disabilities were not receiving the support they need. I subsequently invited them to speak at the cross-party group on disability, which they did, and to speak with the Deputy Minister in the Welsh Government responsible for this, Jane Hutt. And I also raised this in the Equality Communities and Local Government Committee of the Senedd. So I'll conclude by saying the next Welsh Government must therefore ensure that the voice of people with learning disabilities, your voice, is heard and involved in the design and delivery of services, not just when crisis happens, but before crisis happens, to prevent things being worse and helping things be made better for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark Isherwood MS, for joining us today, and thank you for your hard work and dedication that you give to disability rights. It is very much appreciated.
Thank you.
I can see a fair few hands up. Faye, would you like to go first?
Hi, I just really briefly, and I just say it's been a massive privilege to meet RG and Malara and hear their story. And I just want to say I'm massively sorry about what your relative had to go through, and I'm really sorry that he sadly passed away in your family. And I just want to say that I'm really grateful. I had a similar experience of being restrained in many mental health institutions over the years, and thank God I never died. And it's been a massive privilege to be able to meet your relative, to be able to meet you and hear all about your relative's story and how you're going to many conferences and many rights meetings and holding your own. And it's really brave to do that. And I'm really privileged to meet you and your family. And just thank you very much for allowing me to have the time to meet you, spend time with you, and speak to you about your story and about mine. So thank you ever so much. I'm really privileged to be here today. Thank you very much.
Sorry, thank you, Faye. I can see Rebecca has got a hand. Rebecca Chick has got a hand up.
It's not a particular question. It's not a question that I want to ask the thing. I just want to bring up what I got part-time paid employment job, and I have learning disability myself, but I don't show it. People look at me and say, oh, you haven't got a learning disability, because I don't show it. But I do have learning disabilities, and just basically saying, I know what, it's awful sad to hear about that gentleman who died, and I hope I can help that family by putting a petition to get it into Wales law. And it's upset me, I really have. But it was nice to hear it. It was nice to hear that message. Now we know what's going on with people, with black people. And it should be respected the same as the white people, not just class that's black. Because they're all the same, we're all equal, it's just a different colour. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. I'm just going through my list. We should probably hear. Okay, Edwin, would you like to say? You have something you'd like to say?
Thank you very much. What a brilliant manifesto launch. So, Mark, I just wanted to say something to you. Really, I'm Professor Edwin Jones, and I do some work supporting All Wales People First. We just heard from Adja Lewis and Molara, who spoke about the death of Adji's son and Molara's cousin due to the inappropriate use of restraint when he was voluntarily admitted himself to a psychiatric unit in London. We're very keen for this issue to be taken up with Wales. We have the Reducing Restrictive Practice Framework. Please could I ask you to invite Adji and Molara to speak at the Cross Parliamentary Disability Group. We really appreciate your support on this, and I think when you hear and other members of that group hear what they have to say, you'll understand why it's such an important issue for us. And then last of all, llongyfarchiadau. Congratulations, All Wales People First. You make me so pleased and so proud just to see the work you do. Well done, well done. Thanks.
Well, I completely echo your second comment. Great job, everybody. And you'll keep speaking up. You're the experts in your lives, and other people need to understand that. In terms of your first point, because it's a small matter of an election, the election period starts on the 7th of April when I'm just a candidate. So the people will decide whether I'm actually a member or not next time. And when the Welsh Parliament, the Senedd, goes into dissolution, when this term finishes, all the cross-party groups disappear. They don't exist any longer. So the members of the new Senedd would have to agree to form a new group, either identical or incorporating the same things. At the moment, as most of you will know, we're sponsored by Learning Disability Wales, and our group secretary is Zoe Richards, who is the chief executive of Learning Disability Wales. I know, well, 99.99% she'd be delighted for them to come and speak at the group, as would I. A group has to have a minimum of 3 members of 3 different parties coming together to establish it. So if we can achieve that, if I'm there and we can achieve that, or if I'm not there and 3 people are can achieve that, then please come to the chair, whoever they are, me or someone else, and Zoe, and put that request directly to them.
Okay, thank you, Edwin and Mark. Nextly, we will hear from David.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify what you came up with the about the self-advocacy groups. Because of our self-advocacy groups, like in like Powers Speak First, our authorities don't think it's needed. So they think it's only one-to-one self-advocacy. But if you're with a group, you learn together and you make your voices even hearder. So I want to know is what is going to happen to like self-advocacy groups like Peak First Group, like in Paris, because like the funding, there's not enough money, I know, but our authority in Paris Council, we just need someone to actually tell them, not just people in power, but also people who haven't got the power, like People First. But if we haven't got a group, we can't tell them.
Yeah.
So what's your plan of action there?
Well, in my personal view, we need to start turning some of that law I spoke about into action. I mean, I was at a meeting just beforehand because the Age Alliance Wales have launched their manifesto. I was just listening to them. But one of the things that keeps coming up, and tomorrow I'm speaking at the launch for the Wales Neurological Alliance. That's people with a whole range of conditions like multiple sclerosis and Parkinson's and epilepsy and stroke and all sorts of things. And one of the concerns is that the legislation isn't being properly monitored, and evaluated, and not just done by important people in big jobs, but actually be done by the people who use those services, which are supposed to be designed with them as individuals and communities. That's what the Act says.
But also, me and my wife used to work for Powers Speak First before the council decided, well, when go cut your funding, and then automatically they said, oh, by the way, we're going to cut your funding again without no warning. I stress, there was no warning. They said there was warning, but I didn't hear a peep from them.
No. Well, in terms of holding councils to account, councillors are supposedly elected to do that. I don't know whether you asked your own councillors to help, and if so, whether they did or not. And also remember that we used to be called assembly members, we're now called members of the Senate. It's the same thing. But whether you asked any of your own members of the Senate if they would speak up for you. If you didn't, you may want to. If anybody asks for your vote during the election, whichever party, ask them if they would support you on this. And then if they say yes, if they get elected, ring them up or send them an email or knock on their door and say, right, you said you'd help me, now do it. But I'm here to help you too, because it's about doing things, supposedly doing things with each other, not to each other. And that's the basic understanding gap that often exists when people are in important public roles, that they don't know everything. And the best ones understand that and recognize that if they work with people and groups and communities, they will prevent a lot of problems happening, improve a lot of lives, and spend money better as well. But if I was in government, first I've got to get re-elected, but if I was in government, I'd be wanting to, turn that power thing upside down, design the system backwards so that those services are genuinely co-produced with people in those communities, not as some empty political word. Lots of speeches talk about co-producing things, but that means breaking down the barriers between the people who provide the services and the people who use them as equal partners, so you design and deliver them together. And having voice is central. If you haven't got voice, how can you begin to do that?
Okay, thank you again, Mark Isherwood. We have to close the meeting really soon, so we just have one or two more quick questions or comments. Anita, I know you've had your hand up for quite a while, so I think you should go next.
Hiya, Joe. Hiya, guys. I'm a chair of the Our Voice, Our Choice in Ceredigion, and I'm sat in today, turning around and representing on behalf of my national rep, Lindsay, who's unfortunately couldn't make it today. And my question is this. Within light of what we've just heard from, is it Aji? Is it? Yeah. About her son and the restraints and everything, then I personally think that everybody that deals with people with learning difficulties or disabilities should go through training. Learning disability training on how we should be treated respectfully and what's the word I'm looking for? Respectfully and with dignity as well, because I think that nobody who's going through an episode, whether it be epilepsy, autism, or anything like that, that they should be restrained, because it is not acceptable. So I reckon that all the hospital staff, all the police and anybody else, including the social services and anybody else that has dealings with people with LD should do LD training.
Thank you. I completely agree. And not just training, but incorporating it. I don't know if you like the term or not, but lived experience training. The training has to involve people who either are on the autistic spectrum or are people with learning disabilities or have other relevant condition, or people who know them well, their mums and dads, their families, their carers, people who love them and understand what this really means. Because too often, those people you refer to will have training. It's probably a one-day course. It may be done on the computer, an online module that they've gone through, and suddenly they're experts. But the best training I've seen is when I've taken friends, for example, on the autism spectrum, who are trainers or relatives. I know a good friend of mine who's a mum of a young man with learning disabilities, also autistic, and she's a professional trainer. But they take the real story into the training room, and it's not just a one-off event. It's helping people see the world better, understanding the world better, understanding how other people react to things. Because as you indicate, often when people get more anxious or start melting down, that's because of the way they've been treated. That's because those public officials haven't taken the time to get to know them, to understand what their communication needs or sensory needs are, or their processing needs might be. And if they do that and agree that with the individual, then the likelihood of that person getting really anxious and upset in the first place is, as you know, virtually removed. It's only when big important people start throwing words at you, telling you to do things, or asking you to fill in forms, or asking complicated questions you haven't had time to think about, that people get anxious and then find they're being restrained because they're being accused of being aggressive. So it's turning it around completely. I couldn't agree more. And I've been saying this for years in the Welsh Parliament and outside it. And I'll finish with an excellent example. A friend of mine who he doesn't have learning disabilities. He has Asperger's. So he's a unique individual. He's an author. He writes very good books, and he really brings to life the world as he sees it, and anybody can read those and benefit from it. But he loves cricket and football, and a few years ago he went with his nephew on the train to London to watch a big cricket match, and he was treated terribly at the station because the person speaking to him didn't even attempt to find out whether this person may need adjustments in how he spoke with him. So he contacted me, and I contacted Virgin Trains, who were responsible. One of their staff was responsible, and they checked. It was all caught on CCTV camera, and they saw and acknowledged the problem immediately. And as well as apologising and giving him free tickets and things, they invited him to go to their training unit in Crewe to train them from senior management down. So I drove him over with his mum and sat there, and he presented a brilliant training session which brought it to life for them. Some of them said, I thought I understood autism, now I realise how little I knew. And others said, I didn't know anything, and you really helped me. That will really help me in my job on the station platform, for example. And it was simple. It was just listening to the people and involving the people who know what life is like and what other people, or how others should show you dignity and respect to prevent problems starting in the first place.
Yeah. Could I just say, Anita, what an insightful comment and question. Training is paramount, and that's what Cheney's law is about. It's about training, de-escalation, not calling the police, not putting your hands up, standing back. Because I don't know anybody who works in a police, who is a policeman or a prison officer or nurse or whatever. You don't get up in the morning and say, I'm going to kill somebody today. But the line between life and death is so narrow that you have to think, because it's not something I would want another family to go through. And it's definitely not something I would want on your conscience. You cannot tell me that you kill somebody and things are the same. No, you don't. It doesn't happen like that. So we have to concentrate on training. And that's why Cheney's law is very important, because we have, they are setting up trainings. Each mental health unit at the moment, because it's mental health units, has to have a specified trainer who has to say, log when they train, what they train, etc., etc. And when there are incidences of restraint, they have to report it. to the trust, to the board of the trust, and then the trust has to send it to the Minister of Health. And that is why it's so important. It's the only law in the world that has dealt with this so far. And I'd like Mark, if you could, just to try and find out about Cheney's law. Unfortunately, in England, we've had problems getting the guidance out, but I think the Welsh can do much, much better, and can, you know, it can go across all spectrums: health, education, learning disability schools, where there's a lot of restraint. A lot, I mean, it's not killing people, but there's a lot of restraint, and any restraint has a psychological effect on the person. So, you know, these are things that we're trying to do. That's why Cheney's law in Wales could be much better than it is in England.
Is that S-H-A?
S-E-N-I. S-E-N-I apostrophe S, law, Cheney's law.
Right.
And it's not, that's how everybody knows it. If you put that in Google, it all comes out. That's what everybody calls it. And it was passed in 2018 in the British Parliament. In the English Parliament, sorry, it only, you know, that's why we're trying to push it. And that's why you have the opportunity in Wales of doing much bigger, much better than they've done here.
We're trying that. There's an interesting situation in Wales. We've got the legislation I referred to, like the Social Services and Wellbeing Act and the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, and they use the right language and seek to do the right things, but they're generic. They're for all people. They're not specific to particular communities of need. Now, I've tried, for example, to introduce an autism bill for Wales, and it was voted down. I tried to introduce, well, a colleague reintroduced it and it was voted down again. A few weeks ago, I won the ballot to propose legislation on a subject of choice. This was only, it didn't actually start the legislative process, it just established whether the support was there. And that was to establish a British Sign Language Act in Wales. Partly to try and persuade UK government to do the same, because Scotland has done it. It was passed, but it doesn't force the next government to do it. So we're going to have to start again. Ministers abstained. So sometimes we have this, perhaps, you know, it's not a party political issue. It's almost a different, there are those who believe we should have generic legislation and that they give it time, that'll sort it out for everybody. And others like me who say, yes, we need that as the wrapper, but we still need to address specific, you know, have specific statutory duties in relation to particular communities of need. Otherwise, we'll miss them.
Thank you all very much for being here today for the launch of our All Wales People First Manifesto. And thank you and goodbye.